This video is now in session, and damn, that is the one word that could be used to describe the elections, or mainly the elections in New Jersey and Virginia that occurred yesterday. So I guess like Republicans and Democrats can both say damn, but for different reasons. And I guess before this video starts, I would like to preemptively apologize for saying any curse words because there are a lot of things to extrapolate from these two elections that we've never really been able to have an opportunity to do so in other elections that occurred this year. So, there's so much information to go through at this point, and there's a lot more data and votes that have to be processed, which is why we are going to break this video down into two parts. One that is being released today, which you're watching, and then we'll most likely release another one tomorrow. But in the coming days, we'll also release more general videos that will use both of these elections in New Jersey and Virginia, and as well as other elections that occurred, especially in mayoral elections in Boston, the question about police in Minneapolis, the mayor election in Buffalo, a lot of these different elections to then figure out what I guess the national, what people think as a whole of the Democrats and other things that are going on in national politics. So today we're going to mainly focus on Virginia, because for New Jersey, even though Phil Murphy has been projected already to be winning this re-election campaign, ultimately there are still many seats left to go in the state assembly and in the state senate. Now, I just want to note that this election was actually really good for us in terms of our predictions, because we did predict that Phil Murphy would win by a narrower margin, a much narrower margin than in the 2017 election. We also predicted that Glenn Youngkin would win the Virginia gubernatorial election, and that Republicans in general would have a very good election night. But we were also, like most other Americans, surprised at the extent to which this had occurred. Phil Murphy right now is less than a percentage point in terms of a margin of victory against Jack Ciattarelli. Now, only 90% of the votes have been reported, and the rest of the votes are mainly in more Democratic areas like Essex County and in Mercer County. But the thing is, ultimately, this is a much closer election than we had anticipated, that anyone had anticipated, and it provides a worrying sign for the Democratic Party. I know I'm not trying to mention New Jersey so much in this video because there's still a lot more votes to occur, but right now, like, the New Jersey Democratic Party is so bad to the point where the most powerful individual in the Senate, Steve Sweeney, who is the Senate Majority Leader in New Jersey, he is losing to a Republican who barely campaigned in this election. The opposition in this race only spent $351 in campaigning, and they're ahead of Stephen Sweeney. So that just shows how the Democrats have really fallen from where they were in 2017, which was a knockout election in New Jersey and in Virginia. So in this video, we're going to talk about Virginia. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. Glenn Youngkin has officially won this election against Terry McAuliffe by around 2.5 percentage points. That margin may narrow a little bit, but it's not going to be anything significant. So if we compare that to what we predicted, which was Glenn Youngkin winning by less than a percentage point, that recognizes a 1.5%, I guess, deviation from our expectations. So it's kind of close to the actual, the outcome. But if we look at Virginia as a whole, many of these counties have become much more Republican. If we look at the shift from the 2020 presidential election, what you'll see is that every single county, not one county, every single county has shifted more towards the Republican Party. Not one county has shifted more to the left. None at all. Even in the growing growing Northern Virginia region, we don't really see any shift to the left. We only see shifts to the right. So that is a significant drawback for Terry McAuliffe and other Democrats. If we look at major voting areas, you can see that they're down for the Democratic percentage in comparison to the 2017 election. You can see here when where Ralph Northam won in 2017, he won London County by 20 percentage points. If we look here in the same county, it's only 11 percentage points. So that's a decrease of 9 percentage points. And if we look at the shift, it represents a 14-point shift more to the Republican side, more to Glenn Youngkin. If we look at Fairfax County, 67.9%, 67.9% versus 31.2%. You can see here 64%, 34%, a decrease in the percentage share for the Democrats. If we look at Norfolk and in Virginia, in the Richmond suburbs, we can see even more of this trend in greater detail. You can see that a lot of these counties that were won by Northam in the 2017 election and by Biden in the 2020 election were flipped to the Republican side. You can see Chesapeake County, Virginia Beach, Surrey County, Sussex County, all of these places, well, besides Sussex County, and then in the addition of Northampton County, all of them flipped from Democratic, from Ralph Northam, who is the incumbent governor, to Glenn Youngkin. You can see that these flips are actually pretty substantial. Glenn Youngkin won Virginia Beach by 8 percentage points, by 8.3 percentage points. Chesapeake, the Chesapeake area, he won by 6.1%. That's a huge monumental shift from what we saw here, which was an 8 percentage point, or rather 7.4 percentage point lead by Northam in the 2017 election. Here you can see a 5 percentage lead by Northam in the 2017 election. So that represents a 13-point shift in this area. That's major. And the reason why this is occurring is because of the National Democrats. What we're seeing here, there are many reasons to credit the downfall of Terry McAuliffe and the Virginia Democrats in this election, but one of the most major ones is that the Democrats in Washington are being incompetent. It's exactly like 2008 to 2010, focusing on the issues that may not necessarily matter to present-day voters and going a little bit too liberal for the national the national spectrum in the things that they do. So, for example, the $1.75 trillion budget plan, that for many people is too liberal, and for other people, they're asking why it's not getting passed, because you have these two groups of people who are kind of trying to look at this in a pragmatist view, in a pragmatic way, and what they're seeing is that Democrats have a trifecta in Washington, meaning that there is no majority that can stop from doing something, and then the Democrats also proposed a lot of good things, a lot of things that were popular among the general American public, yet none of it is getting passed. And the Democrats are going further than what many people had expected. Biden is going further to the left than what many moderates and what many centrists wanted him to go towards. So because of that, they did not reward Biden at all in the 2021 election. And if we look at core issues like education, as well as more local issues like infrastructure, these are things that will be important for 2022. 2022 will be a local election, and what we saw in 2020 was that it was also a local election, because all politics is local, and that is especially true now, because what we are seeing is that a lot of independents are tired. They are tired of hearing about the national zeitgeist of Donald Trump, and as well as the rhetoric that comes and that surrounds him. So as a result, they want to focus on local issues, and they feel that the Democrats are not doing that. And this is partially accentuated by Terry McAuliffe, who throughout his campaign attempted to position Youngkin as a Trump type of candidate, calling him Glenn Trumpkin. So it's ridiculous rhetoric, but it's also rhetoric that just hasn't worked. It hasn't worked in 2020, and it's not working here in 2021. And the Democrats need to realize that they can no longer rely on Trump. Trump, he might run in 2024. And that will pose a problem for the Republicans if he does indeed choose to run in 2024. But for the Democrats right now, and for the majority of the American public, they don't really care about Trump right now. What the problem is in their day-to-day lives is not Trump and his actions, but rather inflation, the supply chain issues, gas prices going up, education is an issue, COVID is still an issue, and what we're seeing is that the American public is tired. They are tired that nothing is getting done. Now, Biden has recognized this today. He said that Virginia showed that for the Democrats, we need to get something done, but for the Democrats, it doesn't seem like that's happening, because right now what we're seeing is that Nancy Pelosi is now putting the infrastructure bill back into voting and essentially putting it up for a vote very soon. And then she also said that the paid leave that was planned by the Democrats, where there would be paid leave of 4 weeks upon the birth of a child of the individual's child, that kind of provision has been put back in the budget bill. But Joe Manchin has opposed that, and he said again today that slow down. I don't agree with that. Why are you putting it back in there? And we're getting to the same problem, the same recurrent problem for the Democrats, which is that there are so many views that it is such a big coalition to the point where it's really hard to try to balance the political aspects that come with certain provisions, as well as the needs and the wants of certain representatives who are trying to best represent their constituents and their supporters. So that is a growing problem in the Democratic Party, and it's something that is going to solve a trouble in 2022, because what we see in Virginia is that Republicans have had a very good time with making politics local. That is their expertise, and this doesn't just apply to Virginia. It applies to nationwide, and it's something that's been happening for decades, and it kind of makes sense. The Republican Party is the party of states' rights. It is the party of community legislation. So it wouldn't be of any surprise that they are campaigning locally, and right now it is benefiting them because many independents, many Republicans want their politics to be local. They care about cultural issues that are happening right now. They care about things that are happening in their lives, and they don't care about the kind of rhetoric that comes with it. Now Trump reverberated those rhetorics, that political rhetoric, which is why many people voted against him, including many Youngkin voters who voted against Trump in the 2020 election. But right now the Democrats are the ones who are spreading rhetoric. They are the ones that are talking less about policy in these elections and more about Trump, more about how the Republicans don't follow the scientists, how they don't follow the facts, and that may serve as good rhetoric. But right now, the public doesn't want rhetoric; they want action, and that's what the Democrats campaigned on in 2020. That's what Joe Biden campaigned on, and currently, that's just not happening in Virginia. In the 2019 elections, the Democrats campaigned incredibly locally, and they said that we will actually get stuff done. Currently, the Republican administration in Virginia is not getting anything done, or at least the Republican-led House of Delegates was not doing anything related to their day-to-day lives like infrastructure. So that's how the Democrats were able to succeed in 2019. But they haven't been able to get substantial action done, and the National Democrats, they haven't been able to pass anything, which means that many Virginian voters feel betrayed by the Democratic Party, that they are not actually following through with their promises. And now you have the Republicans making the exact same argument of, hey, we are the party that actually is local and that focuses on legislation, please vote for us. And that so far is being successful. Now, whether that kind of tactic can be applied in 2022, that's really unsure, because Donald Trump is still a big factor. He happened to not heavily engage in the 2021 election here in Virginia, but he could do so in 2022, and he has already done so. In Alaska, for example, there's a bitter primary going on. In Georgia, there's also another bitter primary going on in the governor's race, and that could serve as problems for the Republican Party. But as of this moment, the Democrats are in the worst. The Democrats are in worst position because a lot of the localized issues. That Youngkin focused are gaining traction among both independents and the core Republican base. And it's something that Democrats cannot simply solve that easily. These kinds of issues are things that Democrats will find a very hard time solving within the next year because there is just 1 year left until the midterm elections occur. If we look at all the issues happening, first, let's go through the culture wars. The culture wars with education, defund the police. The thing with that is that Republicans are really good at framing the Democrats in a negative way about cultural issues, so much to the point where it is succeeding and that the Democrats are having a hard time reversing a lot of these name callings. For example, defund the police. Defund the police. The defund the police movement is not necessarily about defunding the police, but the fact that I've called it defund the police, and the fact that many people call it defund the police, it just gives it a very bad taste among general Americans who don't feel like, who mostly disagree with that singular notion of defunding the police. So that is a very hard thing to do. Communications seems like a very sore point for the Democrats, both nationally and in states like Florida and I guess in Virginia. Another issue is that for this election, for the Virginia election, Youngkin was able to surge so much because of raw math, because he was able to gain a lot of votes in these rural parts of Virginia. And that's an incredibly hard thing for the Democrats to solve, because the only way for them to counteract this large shift is either to shift some of those votes back to the Democratic Party or shift more votes in Fairfax County to them. And both are a very hard thing to do. What we're seeing is that in rural areas, Democrats are essentially without any kind of infrastructure. So it's not like they can change a lot of these vote totals in these counties in future elections. If we look at the second strategy of trying to turn out more voters in the Democratic counties, what we're finding is that a lot of progressives who live in those Democratic counties are getting tired that nothing is getting done. Both the moderates and the progressives of the Democratic Party can agree that they are tired that nothing is getting done. And as a result, it's causing a lot of political pressure, and it's costing the Democrats in Washington. And if we expand on this idea of Democrats having a hard time in 2022, if we look at more national issues, a lot of the issues that Democrats currently face are very hard to solve. For example, inflation. Inflation is at an all-time high in the United States, it should be, because inflation a small level of inflation is good for the economy. But what we're seeing is that inflation is rising at a particularly fast rate, one that worries a lot of individuals, a lot of Americans. Now, how do you solve this issue? Well, you should be finding more places to fund your things. And what's the best way to do that, and what's the most consistent way to do that? Raising taxes. What does raising taxes do? It does not benefit our economy at all. It does not benefit at least a pandemic economy. It does not benefit an economy that is still trying to surge back from the lows of 2020, and that's what we saw in 2008 and 2009, which is that higher taxes aren't necessarily good for the economy when it's trying to improve. So there's not really much of a way that Democrats can reverse this inflation. They can stop it from going further, but it's already at an all-time high. And for most Americans, they'll just have to get used to it for the next 2 years or so. But that's not a good message for the Democrats, saying that you just have to get used to it. That's just how the economy works. Just deal with it. It's kind of like how Terry McAuliffe said, parents should not be in charge of what their child's education should be. It's kind of it's not really a good statement to make, and it's not one that captivates anyone. So we have that first issue of inflation, and then we have supply chain issues. Supply chain issues are currently causing many shipments to be delayed, and this affects not only consumers but also small businesses in the United States, because what we're seeing is that many small businesses are getting their products delivered later than usual, and that there is a backlog occurring. And this also applies to larger companies who see their products being delayed, and that is impacting the holiday season, because a lot of items are going to go out of stock before the peak holiday shopping even begins, which means a lot of lost revenue from the fact that supply chain issues are rampant in the year that we are in. Now, how does the United States solve this? At least in the short term, within 1 year, because that's when the midterm elections will happen. It's very hard. It's incredibly hard because, first of all, the supply chain issue is global. It's a global problem. So for the United States, the only way they can really kind of solve this issue is by going to the world stage. And to do that, they have to go through the World Trade Organization and the United Nations, where there are many adversaries who are against U.S. progress, who are against capitalism and consumerism in the United States. So the global supply chain is going to be a hard thing to solve. And even if the United States does come to an agreement with their adversaries like China about this issue of global supply chains, then it's going to take at least a year for the supply chain to go back to normal, because this system is a very large system, and it's also a very fragile one, because in America we have adapted to the idea of just-in-time shipping, just-in-time delivery, where we make products as fast as possible, and we make products based on the demands of consumers. But when you have a massive dip like there was in demand during 2020, then you have a lot of those factories shut down, and it's not easy to restart those factories because you have a lot of lost labor. So when you are trying to restart a lot of the production lines, when Americans desperately want a product in 2021, it's hard to get it back and create the maximum amount of profits, because it takes time to hire individuals, it takes time to ship, it takes time to get this all sorted. And when you multiply this thousands of times across many other manufacturing lines, then what you'll see is that a lot of ships will be delayed, a lot of ports will be above capacity, and that ultimately Americans and businesses won't get the goods that they need in time. So that's a very long explanation of saying that the supply chain issue that we're seeing right now is not going to be solved by the midterms, and that's a huge issue for the Democratic Party, because they need results for 2022. They need to show Americans that they are actually fixing day-to-day issues. And then if we also look at the general economy, the resurgence of the economy has slowed down, especially because of the Delta variant. It started slowing down when the variant started increasing, and what we're seeing is that now there is a plateau occurring. Thankfully, with the Delta variant going down in the United States as of November 3rd, what we're seeing is that jobs are starting to come back again, and that the economy is starting to go back into a positive gain, but it's not doing it at a fast enough rate. It's not doing it at a rate that Americans will be able to see, and unfortunately, unfortunately for the Democrats, and I guess unfortunately for Americans in general, what we could see is that the economy may not go back to, or I guess, surge past where it was in 2019, at least by the midterm elections. So that's even more issues for the Democratic Party, because not only are these issues really hard to solve within 1 year, but it's also issues that the Democrats can't solve because it just naturally happens. You have to naturally let the economy go back to normal, because what we've seen is that trying to inject money into it only increases the inflation rate. So it's just something that has to happen naturally, and what we find is that in this capitalistic society, that natural growth takes a long time, especially when you are trying to go down or you are trying to recover from a large troll made by the previous president in 2020. So that's the problems that Democrats face right now. The Virginia elections only further compound these problems, and it actually gives a reality check for the Democratic Party to say, what do we need to do by 2022? There's going to be a lot of reflection that has to be done by the Democratic Party to figure out what kinds of mistakes they made in the Virginia and the New Jersey governor's elections and what they could do to, I guess, be prepared in 2022. But it's really hard. The everything is right now against the Democratic Party. The issues are against the Democratic Party. Incumbency against the Democratic Party. These elections against the Democratic Party. The culture wars against the Democratic Party. A resurgence of Republican voters in rural areas against the Democratic Party. A lack of equal surges by Democratic votes in Democratic places is against the Democratic Party. Redistricting against the Democratic Party. A lot of Supreme Court issues will likely be against the Democratic Party. So even though Democrats right now have a trifecta in the federal government, they could very well see a decline like there was in 2010. Before the 2021 election, before this election occurred, we said that there was a chance that the Democrats could gain seats in the Senate because of the Pennsylvania Senate race, and they would have less than an 8% chance of retaining the House. After this election, we are quite confident in saying that the Democrats have a really high chance of losing the same amount of seats that they lost in the 2010 election, and that the Democrats could very well lose the Senate in 2022. So that's unfortunate for the Democratic Party, and a lot of these issues are unfortunate for America, but it's just a reflection of how Biden is not how I guess nothing is getting done in Washington. And it's always been this way since the 2000 elections. It's been this way where Washington hasn't been able to get major things done. And that's unfortunate, but it's something that needs to be corrected by the Democratic Party if they want any chance of retaining the Senate in 2022, and if they even want a slim chance to occur of retaining the House in that election. So that's the things to take away from the Virginia election. There are even more things to take away from the New Jersey election because of the gains that Phil Murphy made in this race and the gains that Jack Ciattarelli made, as well as a lot of state assembly and state senate seats, like the 3rd legislative district, where we see Stephen Sweeney down. Now, if we quickly look at other races in Virginia, you can see that it's a bloodbath in favor of the Republican Party. You can see in the House of Delegates, the Republicans have already won 50 seats, and most likely they will win. They will win the 91st House district, where Cardozo will most likely win against the incumbent by just about 1 percentage point. And if they do that, that is an outright majority for the Republicans, meaning a flip of control from the Democrats to the Republicans. So that would most likely result in a 51-49 majority for the Republican Party, which is very similar to the 2017 election in Virginia, except instead of a decrease in Republican seats, it's an increase of Republican seats from the previous election. So those are the things to note in this election. Has been very interesting. It's been very interesting to see because a lot of these results are unsurprising yet as well, but also at the same time very surprising. But for the Democrats, they have a very tough road ahead, and if they want to actually if they want to fix this, if they want to have some kind of dignity left for the 2022 election, their work had to have started 2 months ago, but they have to start the work now. They have to start making progress in Washington if they want any chance of winning, and they also have to I guess, pray and hope that the current issues that they can't control, like inflation, that they can't necessarily control, like inflation and the global supply chain, at least decreases in severity in time for the 2022 election. So that's the end of this video. I will be posting another video tomorrow about New Jersey, but until then, this video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.